Hello, my name is Jose Luis. I want to tell you about something that happened to me while I was working in my truck one night on the road. I've been a truck driver for a little over 15 years, and I've seen many things that, let's say, aren't so common to see. But there's one in particular that to this day still causes me a lot of unease and some anxiety when I think about it, and I want to share it with all of you. A couple of years ago, I was driving on a highway in the state of Veracruz. I was working, and it was already my second day on the road. It was early in the morning, and I was feeling quite tired, so I decided to pull over at the first place I came across. It was a spot that seemed to be a rest stop, but it was in very bad condition. It looked like the place was abandoned, as there wasn't even any light there. I thought it was the perfect place to park and sleep for a few hours, since no one would stop there, and therefore there would be no noise or anyone bothering me. So without thinking much more about it, I parked behind the place, as I felt more comfortable where no one could see my truck. I lay down on the bunk in the cab and fell asleep almost immediately, as I was truly exhausted. About 2 hours later, something woke me up suddenly. It was the voice of a little girl, asking for help while crying. Honestly, my skin crawled when I heard that. I didn't know what to do because, to be honest, I was terrified of getting out of my truck. I didn't know what I would find out there, because what would a little girl be doing alone in the middle of nowhere? I moved to the driver's seat. The crying continued, but this time it sounded a bit farther away. I tried to look out the windows, but I couldn't see anyone around. It was very dark, so it was hard for me to see anything. The voice kept asking for help. I could hear it coming from the woods behind the rest stop. It was so convincing that I couldn't take it anymore and got out of my truck to see what was going on. I thought there might actually be someone needing help, because in Mexico the situation can be delicate. I thought it could be related to a disappearance due to crime or something like that. A lot of things were going through my mind. I turned on my phone's flashlight and started walking into the woods, following that voice that wouldn't stop asking for help. The night was very cold. I don't know if that explains why I suddenly started feeling my body trembling and getting chills. I began to feel my legs weaken and a slight pain in my back that was inexplicable, as I had never suffered from that kind of pain before. But then I understood that my body was warning me. It was telling me I was in a dangerous situation, that I should get out of there. But I didn't listen and kept going. I was already quite deep into the woods. There were a few trees, but everything was in complete darkness. At one point, the girl's voice sounded closer and closer, as if she were right next to me, but I couldn't see anyone anywhere. So I stopped and stood still for about a minute, and then the voice stopped. I was there, standing in the middle of nowhere, shining my phone's light around, with only the sound of crickets and the animals that lived there in the background. I knew I had to get out of there immediately, but before I could move, a sinister and eerie laugh of an old woman started echoing right above me. I froze in shock as my legs wouldn't respond to run away. I refused to point my flashlight upward, as I was standing right under a tree. I didn't want to see what was up there mocking me, but I couldn't help myself. When my flashlight illuminated the tree, I saw an old woman hanging with her legs wrapped around the branch, her head upside down just a short distance from mine. Her long grey hair almost touched my head. The woman was swinging in such an eerie way while mocking me. At that moment, I ran as fast as I could toward my truck. I didn't look back at any point. The woman kept laughing, but her horrible voice sounded farther and farther away. That's how I knew she wasn't chasing me, but that didn't take away the panic and adrenaline I felt in those seconds as I ran to my truck. I got there and climbed in immediately. As best as I could, I started the engine and began driving to get away from there as fast as possible, so much so that I almost crashed into a bus passing by while I was trying to leave that place. My whole body was trembling as I drove. I knew I couldn't continue like that, so I pulled into the first gas station I saw to calm down and try to understand what had happened. But of course, there's no logical explanation for it. It just remained a horrible experience I had to go through. Maybe I brought it on myself by going to a desolate and abandoned place, I don't know. But there are things out there, in the remote places we don't know. Strange people, or I dare say, even beings that aren't on this earthly plane. Take care of yourselves and never make the mistake that almost cost me my life. I've never been very superstitious, but I do know that on the road there are things better left unquestioned. I'm not talking about ghosts or legends to scare rookies, but about places where something just doesn't fit, as if time doesn't flow the same, or as if you cross an invisible line where the rules change. Over the years, I've learned that the best advice from other truckers doesn't come from company manuals, but from the warnings passed by word of mouth at coffee stops and on radio channels. But that day, like many others, I decided to ignore the voice of experience. I had set out early with a load of industrial materials, the kind of cargo that doesn't seem worth much but that any insurer would gladly pay for if it got lost. The route was long, and I'd already been in the driver's seat for many hours, so I started looking for a place to stop, even if just to stretch my legs and grab something to eat. My original plan was to reach a company-recommended station, but sleepiness started to get the better of me earlier than expected. I saw a sign for a gas station a few kilometers away and decided it didn't matter if I slept there or farther ahead. From the moment I took the exit, something made me feel uneasy. It wasn't the typical well-lit station with trucks parked in rows, but an old place with a single gas pump and a couple of flickering lights. There were no cars, no visible employees, just a convenience store, with its lights on and a soda machine by the entrance. It wasn't ideal, but exhaustion made me ignore the feeling of being in the wrong place. I turned off the engine, locked the doors, and got out for a moment to buy something to drink. When I entered the store, the first thing I noticed was that it smelled damp, as if no one had opened a window in years. Behind the counter was an older man watching a small TV, barely paying attention to me. I grabbed a bottle of water, and when I went to pay, the man mumbled the price without taking his eyes off the screen. It didn't bother me, honestly. I wasn't in the mood to talk. I went out and leaned against the truck's door while drinking, looking around, trying to figure out what was making me so uncomfortable. That's when I saw the other trucker. He was standing on the other side of the parking lot, next to an old truck, one of those you hardly see on the road anymore. He wasn't wearing a uniform or a company jacket, just a dark overall. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there with his arms hanging by his sides and his head slightly tilted toward me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I felt he was watching me. I decided to ignore him and climbed back into the truck. I locked the door, checked that everything was in order, and settled into the seat to sleep for a couple of hours. Outside there was no sound, no engines, no noise from the store. Just a strange silence, as if I were farther from the highway than I actually was. I don't know how much time passed until I was woken up by knocking on the door. It wasn't gentle taps or an accidental bump. It was a constant, rhythmic, insistent knocking, as if someone was testing how hard they needed to knock for me to open the door. I stayed still, holding my breath. I looked out the window but saw no one. For a moment I thought it might have been my imagination or some noise from the place. Then it happened again. 3 sharp knocks. I didn't want to open the door, but I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, shining it on the side of the truck. Nothing. I started to feel a strange cold, not the kind from the weather, but something deeper, something that tightened my stomach. That's when I heard it. Leave. It wasn't a shout, a plea, or a whisper. It was a simple word spoken softly right next to the cab. I froze, flashlight in hand, and then I noticed something else. There was no light outside anymore. The parking lot lights were off, the convenience store was completely dark, and the only light came from my own cab. I started the engine without thinking twice. I made sure the locks were secure and turned on the high beams. When I did, I saw the trucker again. He wasn't where I'd seen him before. Now he was closer, at the store's entrance, and in the shadows. He didn't move, didn't raise his hand or make any signals. He was just there. I floored the accelerator without looking back. When I got back to the highway, I turned on the radio and tried to tune into any station. I didn't say anything on the company channel. I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. I drove without stopping until the next recommended station, and that's where I talked to another trucker, someone who'd been on the route for years. "Where did you stop?" he asked when I told him I'd veered off the route. "At an old gas station, a little before the toll booth." The guy stayed silent for a moment and then shook his head. "You shouldn't have stopped there." I stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "That place is narco territory. Years ago they used it for technical stops, but not for resting. for making people disappear. Truckers who fell asleep there didn't make it back to the road. They say they used them to move cargo without them knowing, or made them disappear just to send a message. The police went there several times, but they never found anything. No reports, no bodies, just rumors. I swallowed hard. So, the guy I saw, he nodded slowly. They say years ago a trucker refused to move a shipment for them. They pulled him out of his truck right there, and no one ever saw him again. Since then, the few who stop at that station say they've seen him. If you're lucky, you just see him standing in the shadows, watching you. But if he knocks on your door, a chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? The guy looked at me seriously. That they don't want you there. And if they warn you, you'd better listen. I stayed silent. There was no point in arguing because deep down, I knew it was true. Since then, I follow the recommendations to the letter. I never stray from the established route. I never stop at places not on the maps. And above all, if I ever hear knocks on the door in the middle of the night, I say a quick thanks, start the engine, and get the hell out of there. If someone ever warns you about a stretch of road, listen to them. Not because strange things might happen, not because of spirits, or because you might get lost in another world. Listen to them because something happened to them, something they'd rather not explain, but that was enough to make them never try it again. I was warned, and I didn't listen. It was my first big solo route, and I didn't want to seem like a rookie. At a service station, a group of truckers was talking about a stretch where GPS devices stopped working and radios filled with static. Some said the road wasn't properly mapped, others that a company built it and never finished it, or that satellites didn't register it correctly. There were many theories, but no concrete explanation. The only thing they agreed on was that when you crossed it, you felt something strange, like you were out of place. I just listened and laughed. In my head, all those stories were pure exaggeration. Besides, if something went wrong, I could just restart the GPS and keep going. The first hour was normal. The road was lonely, with few lights and even less traffic, but that didn't worry me. What did start to unsettle me was the feeling that time wasn't moving. I'd look at the clock, a few minutes would pass, then I'd look again, and barely a minute had gone by. It wasn't tiredness or paranoia because I was fully awake and alert, but there was something in the air, in the way the dashboard lights flickered as if they didn't have enough power. Then the GPS failed. I thought it was a connection issue and checked the signal, but it didn't work. I restarted the system and it was the same. It was as if the road didn't exist. A few seconds later, the radio started with static. I tried changing the frequency, but no matter which one I switched to, the sound was the same. A dry noise, as if something was trying to break through the interference. I turned up the volume a bit and focused on the road, trying to ignore it. Then the engine made a noise and the dashboard lights went out suddenly. I didn't panic. It wasn't the first time I'd seen a failure like that, so I slowed down and pulled over calmly. I sighed and turned off the engine to try starting it again. Nothing. I put on my gloves and got out to check the engine. The air was thick, not cold but heavy, as if the humidity was too concentrated in one spot. I opened the hood, but nothing seemed out of place. Everything was in order. When I looked up, that's when I saw it. On the other side of the road, parked exactly like mine, was another truck. Not just any truck, my truck. The same color, the same model, even the same oil stain on the lower part of the grille. I didn't understand what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. But the worst part was that someone was inside the cab. And it wasn't just anyone. It was me. Not a similar figure. Not a shadow. Or a reflection. It was me sitting in the same seat, wearing the same jacket, the same gloves, with the same expression of disbelief. I don't know how long I stood there staring, but at some point a pain settled in my chest. As if something was squeezing me from the inside, as if an immense worry triggered by my instincts was growing within me. Then a crackle came from the radio, and suddenly the static stopped. The sound was instantaneous, as if someone on the other side had flipped a switch. When I blinked instinctively at the noise, the other truck was gone. The air returned to normal. The engine started without issue. I didn't understand what I was experiencing in that place. I didn't think twice and decided to get out of there. I don't know how long I drove, but when I checked the GPS, the signal was back, and it showed I was kilometers away from where I thought I'd stopped. It was as if that entire stretch of road had been a gap in the route. I never told anyone what happened that night, not because they wouldn't believe me, but because I don't want to give it more space in my head. But since then, I follow the old trucker's advice. I never take routes that don't appear on maps. I never ignore the warnings of the road. And above all, if I ever see a truck identical to mine again, I won't stop to check if the person inside is like me, or if they have darker intentions. Good evening, my name is Julian Trevino, and I transport construction materials. I spend more time on the roads in my truck than at home, but it's something I really enjoy. If it weren't for the crime and some strange things that tend to happen on the roads at night, I'd say it's the perfect job for me. I'm going to tell you about something intense that happened to me on one of these trips I usually take. I'm sharing it, of course, with a lot of respect, but I think this story deserves to be told. I still remember that afternoon clearly. I left the company I work for, heading to another state. It was April, and I remember it was raining heavily, with several storms forecast in the area, so I was driving very cautiously. I was going slower than usual and didn't take my eyes off the road as the rain was intense, and the darkness made the path even blurrier. It was past 4 a.m. I was listening to the radio while driving carefully when, out of nowhere, a woman came out of the woods and crossed in front of me, leaving me no time to brake. Yes, I felt that I hit her with my truck, and even though I wasn't going very fast, I knew I had caused her harm. I got out immediately in the middle of the rain, not before turning on the hazard lights in case another vehicle came by. I ran to the front, expecting to see the worst, but there was nothing on the asphalt. My truck's headlights illuminated a good stretch of the road, and no matter how much I looked, I couldn't find any trace of the woman who had crossed in front of me. With a flashlight, I checked under my truck, even went into the woods to see if she was lying there. I wanted to find her, to help her, to know if she was alive, but I never found her. I called emergency services, but they told me it would take a couple of hours for them to arrive, and to stay put until they got there. So I pulled over and waited. I felt a lot of anguish. I knew it was crucial for the authorities and an ambulance to arrive as soon as possible because the woman, wherever she was, might still be alive and need help. But anyway, after about 2 hours, a patrol car and paramedics arrived. It was already daylight, so it would be easier to search for the woman. But after an hour of searching, we didn't find anyone. There were no traces of anyone having been hit in that spot. Nothing at all. The officers questioned me, asking if I had been drinking or using any kind of drugs, and they even searched my truck, but they found nothing. I haven't drunk in years, and I've never used any substances. I was fully aware and driving very slowly. I knew exactly what I saw and heard, and it wasn't my imagination. The officers, somewhat annoyed, told me to leave and warned that if I made another false report, there would be consequences. I gave up trying to explain what happened. I didn't want trouble, so I just left. 2 days later, I was coming back on the same road, this time during the day, and although it was very cloudy, it wasn't raining. Still, I was driving slowly and very cautiously, as I was somewhat traumatized by what had happened that night. When I passed by the same spot, I couldn't help but stop, because I couldn't get the incident out of my head, and the image of that woman wouldn't leave me in peace. I felt she was still there, needing help, so I pulled over and got out of the truck. I walked along that stretch and ventured a little into the bushes. I wanted to make sure everything was okay to find some peace of mind. But suddenly, as I was walking, I came across something that shocked me. Right in front of me was a cement cross, one of those they put on highways when someone has an accident. But this cross looked very old and worn. It had no flowers or candles, and it seemed to have been there for many years. When I got closer to read what it said, I shuddered, because the cross had a woman's name on it, and the date of death was the same as the morning of the incident, only 10 years earlier. A tear rolled down my face. I understood what had happened. I just touched the cross and wished her eternal rest, then left the place, deeply moved and somewhat shocked. Since that day, every time I pass by there, I bring her a flower, and it seems I'm the only one who does, as her cross is forgotten. Hello Glenn, I'm sending this email to share something horrible I witnessed while working on a highway in the United States, where I used to be a truck driver. I'd like to do it anonymously if possible, of course. As I mentioned, I used to transport fruit to the United States, crossing the border from Mexico and going to various states in the US. It was during one of these trips that this incident happened, one I wish I hadn't been the main witness to. I was heading to a city in Texas. I'd been driving for several hours and it was early morning. I needed to stop somewhere to use the bathroom and buy something to keep me awake for a few more hours and maybe some snacks. I drove until I came across a gas station. Without thinking twice, I pulled into the parking lot and got out of the truck to go to the bathroom and buy food. When I entered the place, I noticed there was no one around, not even someone at the counter. The place was completely empty, but there was country music playing in the background. I walked around looking for the cashier to assist me, but I couldn't see anyone. I decided to head to the bathroom to see if it was open, as I couldn't hold it any longer, but it was locked. Then I knew someone was inside, as I could hear noises coming from there. I knocked on the door, but no one answered, so I decided to wait for the person to come out so I could go in. I assumed it was the cashier attending the place, as there was no one else around. A few minutes passed while I picked out what I'd take to eat and prepared a coffee, but in all that time no one came out of the bathroom. It seemed strange, as it had been a long time for the cashier to leave the place unattended, especially knowing there was someone there who could easily have stolen something. I placed everything I was taking on the counter and walked back to the bathroom. I knocked again, this time asking if they needed help, as I could hear noises inside. It was clear someone was there, but no one responded. I was about to leave when I heard the bathroom door opening. When I turned around, I saw a woman in her 40s or 50s. She was wearing a black shirt with the gas station's logo, so I assumed she was the cashier. I told her I wanted to pay for some items but needed to use the bathroom first. She stared at me in a very strange, somewhat unsettling way and said, "The bathroom is out of service." I asked her what she was doing in there, and she only said she was trying to fix it because she had broken it. The woman was acting very strangely. There was something about her that made me uneasy and didn't inspire trust. Her demeanor was very odd. She kept smiling at me the whole time and seemed tense. I told her to just charge me so I could leave. At that moment, that's all I wanted. The woman walked slowly to the counter, staring into my eyes the entire time. The situation was very uncomfortable. I just wanted to get out of there. When she got to the counter and charged me, I noticed she couldn't open the cash register. She told me that if I didn't have exact change, she couldn't give me any. I told her I didn't, but not to worry, to just leave it. I didn't want to buy anything anymore. I just wanted to leave. I left the items on the counter and gave her a $5 bill to pay for my coffee. After that, I left. Everything had been very strange. I had a very odd feeling that whole night, something I couldn't explain. The next day, I was sleeping in a roadside motel before heading back home when I got a call from an unknown number. It was a state police officer. They needed me to come to the station in that city to give a statement. They didn't explain much, but they said I had been at a crime scene and needed to question me. My stomach churned. I didn't know what had happened, but I immediately knew it was about that gas station. I arrived at the station, and they took me to a room for questioning. In short, they told me I appeared on the gas station's cameras just after a fugitive woman arrived at the place and attacked the cashier on duty that night. She had taken her life and then dragged her to the bathroom to dismember her. They found the cashier with her face disfigured and missing pieces of flesh from various parts of her body. They asked me if I noticed anything strange while talking to the woman. I told them exactly what had happened, and that was it. I never saw a single stain on her hands or clothes, but they said she might have washed herself when she heard someone knocking on the door. She had also taken the cashier's uniform and put it on, and since the uniform was black, it didn't show any stains. They let me go after the interrogation, but I had to appear as a witness at the woman's trial. Seeing her again was truly horrible. I still remember her vacant face, but with eyes full of malice and no hint of remorse, something I had never seen in a human being.